So we'll hear from each of our panellists briefly, and then we'll make sure there's plenty of time for questions from the audience, because it looks to me like we will have plenty of questions and thoughts from all of you. So, delighted to be joined by Layla Moran, who is the newly minted chair of the Health and Social Care
Chair-elect.
Committee. Chair-elect. Okay, right. Among many other jobs. I was looking to have about 6 jobs at the moment, but delighted to have you here. We've got Mark Pack on my left, who is president of the Liberal Democrats and editor of the Liberal Democrat Newswire. And then on my far left, Mackenzie, former Director of Policy for the Deputy Prime Minister during the coalition government, and now Chief Social Purpose Officer at the University of the Arts, London. So you all don't want to hear from me, so without any further ado, I'm going to go first to Layla and then to Mark and Polly, and we'll get going.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you, first of all, for inviting me, and thank you all for coming. And I love that I think just the strength of the number of people in the room suggests that we do want to be a constructive opposition. Just because we've got rid of the Tories, huzzah, does not mean that we don't have a role to play. And I would start by saying, well, the Tories are going through their navel-gazing psychodrama, not just over the next few weeks, but I am very convinced they're going to come to the wrong conclusion with who they elect as their party leader, probably making the mistake to think that in order to regain their electoral fortunes, they have to out-Farage. We are going to find ourselves in an ever more important position in Parliament, because whilst we may not be the official opposition, we are going to be the effective opposition to the Labour government. Yeah. So that means 2 things. First of all, well, we are now the third party again. Now, there are people in the room who remember what that might be like.
I think I'm the only one.
Yes.
Polly was working for Sarah Tether.
Yes, there we are. But I mean, out of the last 100 years, there was only been 9 where we weren't third party. So there is long-standing institutional memory of this, including some of our parliamentarians, but actually the vast majority, including myself, have no experience of what that's like. And I dare say it's lovely. First of all, you're sitting on the front, you get time in debates that is protected. An important part of that means that you are able to influence the debate, you're allowed to bring nuance, you get extra time at the moment where the ministers are still in the room, because what used to happen is we get called, but late in a debate when no one was there and nobody cared. But now the convention is they have to stay to listen to us. So we've got much more ability to be able to scrutinise, influence what ministers are saying. We've also got mechanisms like Health Select Committee, EFRA Select Committee with my colleague Alistair, petitions with Jamie. We are on Liaison Committee, so we get to scrutinise Keir Starmer directly. And our understanding is, although the number isn't confirmed, that we might get as many as 50 select committee places. Now that's huge, and we'll have one at least on all the committees. This is a step change. This is a huge change for the party in our ability to be able to be that constructive opposition. Now I'm just going to focus in on the word constructive for a minute. You will be aware, many of you, I hope, that sort of Punch and Judy politics of what we see on the media and indeed at Prime Minister's questions is just not how it is most of the time. Most of the time, we're generally pleasant to each other, even ones we don't agree with at all. I've had some nice conversations recently with Richard Tice. It was not about politics, but I was well brought up, and when you see someone, you say hello and how are you and how are you getting on, and all that. But that's not sort of the target market. But it's true to say that in opposition over the last 7 years, I've picked up mobile phone numbers of the majority of people who now sit round the cabinet table. We were fighting the Tories together. The strategy of this election was to fight the Tories. The vast majority of our seats where we are second place are Conservative facing. We know who the enemy remains and who they'll continue to be, but we're not about to let Labour have a free rein, regardless, just because they are the ones who have taken the place of the Conservatives. We are liberals. People try to put us into sort of the left versus right box. Are we going to attack them from the left? Are we going to attack them from the right? No, we're going to stand up for our liberal values, and where there are discrepancies between what the Labour Party does and what we believe, we will stand up to it. So winter fuel allowance is the most recent iteration of it. Very often in history we've seen in elements of foreign affairs, we were the ones to lead the way, whether it was on Hong Kong or indeed on Iraq. And I would argue now on Israel-Palestine, our party has been on the right side of history, and it's very often the other parties that come round to our view. So I think we approach this Parliament with an enormous sense of duty to the country. We want, in a sense, the government to succeed. I mean, we kind of wanted the Tories to, but just had no hope whatsoever that they would. I think we all hope Keir Starmer's going to find his feet, that those ministers are going to do well, but we're going to push them in so many ways to do even better. So that's my interpretation of constructive. Engage, but don't roll over. Be unafraid to be liberal and push them where it's necessary. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for, as well as to all of you for turning up, for IPPR for putting on this fringe meeting. And it's one of the perks, I guess, of 72 MPs is the increasing engagement people like IPPR with ourselves. Although I did rather cheekily look at the IPPR website to see how many fringe meetings you're putting on each party conference. I'm glad to say we have achieved parity with the Conservatives, but we have got some way to go to catch up with Labour, which feels symbolic maybe of something generally.
Well, I will just say on behalf of our events team that if I tried to get you to catch up with Labour, Holly might actually kill it.
Yes. But as we seek, therefore, that strategic goal of fringe meeting parity with IPPR, I think we can be confident that success will come from repeating three key things that we got right in the last Parliament. And there is lots that we don't know about this Parliament in terms of how unsuccessful the new Conservative leader will be, in terms of what will happen with Labour Party's popularity. I mean, we're already in this really weird situation where if you look at, say, Keir Starmer's ratings, or obviously very early days, the Labour Party standing in the opinion polls, they're at the sort of level you would expect quite deep into a Parliament, and yet they're also a government with a huge majority. So there are big things we don't know about how our politics will look, but I think we can definitely be confident that if there are three particular things we got right last time, which we need to and should continue to get right, albeit in this new environment. And one is that it is a surprisingly radical proposition in politics to say that you should talk most about the things that matter most to voters. And I think that is in part a fundamentally liberal thing, that if voters tell us, as they do at the moment, that NHS and social care is their, one of their top priorities, that is fundamentally liberal to respect that and to say, yeah, you know what matters most in your life, that's what we've therefore got to talk about most. The second, well actually there is also a very practical benefit of that, which is it's also electorally rather successful. And you saw that in this election where, we were talking about the problems of sewage leaking into hospitals around the country, and the Conservatives were getting angsty about the lanyards worn by health service workers. And so while we were getting our best election result for a century, the Tories were getting their worst election result in the history of the letterbox. And I think there is a very powerful, clear lesson for us from that. But also, it's crucial that we continue to remember that lesson because, it's been a long struggle for us to win back the trust of voters. And I think it's absolutely crucial for our MPs to not in any way give a sense of, hurrah, we're all going to go off and talk about something else now, but rather to deliver on the mandate which they were elected under around health and social care, cost of living and sewage. But if the first lesson is therefore one about sort of humility and trust, I think the second lesson that we again need to apply in this Parliament is about playing to our strengths in local campaigning and in local government. Because 72 MPs was definitely the most eye-catching electoral success for us in the last Parliament, but as importantly, maybe even cover your ears, Layla, more importantly, was the fact that we made gains in every round of local elections and that we have significantly more power in local government to change people's lives than we did 5 years ago. Because it's great, it's great that we have powerful new voices in Parliament campaigning on housing, for example, but it's even better that we have Liberal Democrats in power in places like Eastleigh and Chelmsford showing how you can build more houses and still get re-elected. It's great that we've got powerful new voices and positions in Parliament to be able to promote health and social care. But it's even better that we have Liberal Democrats in power in local government in places like Somerset, introducing new council-run care homes so people can be given care locally and frankly much more cheaply. And it's great that we've got powerful, new voices in Parliament on a whole myriad of other issues, but it's even better that we have so many additional voices in power in local government, meaning that our policy debates are not just about what we would like in some idealised future world, but about what we can actually, the difference we can actually make tomorrow and next week. And I think that brings me briefly to sort of third and final lesson, which is that if you want to radically reform politics, as we do, you have to win under the rules in front of us. And we pulled that off quite remarkably and eye-catchingly, obviously, in the general election. But we also did it in the May local elections. I think it's often overlooked that we won more council seats across the country than the Conservatives, despite getting actually a much lower vote share. And so in that sense, the general election result wasn't, a one-off freak. It was absolutely, under first past the post, what matters is seats, not overall vote share. And exactly how we apply all three of those lessons will, I'm sure, evolve and be different in this new political landscape. But I think those three lessons are key to coming up with a successful answer to your question, and key to making sure that after the next general election we do have fringe meeting parity of the IPPR.
We will hire some more event staff post-haste.
Thank you very much. Is this one on? Yes, great. So, who in this room hates the Conservative Party? Great. And if you hate them even more, you can put up 2 hands. Who in this room hates Nigel Farage?
You've got
No, I'm genuinely interested. It's interesting. Anyone here who's a member of the Labour Party? There'll be some charity observers. Because always, it's interesting. Politics is interesting to me, right? I sort of stumbled into it accidentally. But what's it for, right? Because maybe it's so that you can have a council seat and build some houses. That's a great piece of public service. But I actually don't think it's a reason to be in the Liberal Democrats, because I think that there are councillors of pretty much every party who would say something a bit similar, or they might want to run, they in-source council social care, or actually children's care, another sort of sector that's been sort of horrifically mutilated by private equity. But actually you'll even find Conservatives, not Reform people, they're not usually interested in public, right? Why do we want Liberal Democrats to be elected? Because I think you need to start thinking about that if you are to ask how you might maximise your influence, because it's influence for what? I think, again, most of the Liberal Democrats I've worked with, they're really excited about getting Liberal Democrats elected, almost like a football team, but also motivated by a sense of public service. It's not power for power's sake. And if people in this room are opposed to conservatism, and Layla said that point of out-Faraging Farage as the sort of potential trajectory of the Conservative Party, it seems to me that there is a puzzle for us if we're thinking about the future of the nation. I think it might be, well, there's a choice, right? Would it be good if the Conservative Party out-Faraged Farage and consumed itself trying to be like Reform, so that there was only one Reform Party in the end? Or would it be better if the Conservative Party tacked back to the centre, a centre from which they can win? Because if they do that, A, the Conservative Party might be able to replace Labour in government, which I sort of got the sense there were quite a lot of people nodding when Layla was saying that we want Keir Starmer to find his feet and be successful. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because very few of the people in this room are members of the Labour Party, yet we wish them well. That's because our primary motivation is to want the Conservatives to not be in power. Well, actually, if the Conservatives pull back to the centre, that's their pathway back to victory. And so this question of should you attack the Labour Party from the left or right, it's not a frivolous thing because it's so simple we can just go, oh, well, just liberal values. There's can't really tell you whether we're in favour of more building or less building, or more state control or less state control, and exactly which welfare benefits we're in favour of, and exactly how you might run, you know, the sewage industry. There is an axis of left and right. And if we want to prevent the Conservatives from winning again, maybe in fact we do need to hold that centre ground and not attack the Labour Party from the left, crowded territory for the Green Party. What's Jeremy Corbyn's new party called? Creation. It sounds like an Apprentice thing. What's it called? Anyway, something like that. Thank you. The answer was right here at the front. Because I don't like, really, I don't know if I'd call them deplorables, but the people who are voting for Faragist kind of anti-immigrant, populist, hateful crap, I don't like those people and I don't want them to win. The question is whether we want them to be, in the end, in a coalition with a Conservative party, and I don't mean a formal coalition, I mean all political parties have to have a coalition of different kinds of voters, right? They just do. You have to get to the point of discomfort with the people who are at the fringe of your party to have any chance of reaching enough voters to get to a majority. But those voters who I don't like and I feel troubled by and want to counter their sense of what it is to be British, they will continue to exist for a really long time. And it seems to me that actually a broad church Conservative party is problematic because it puts those people into a position of power. You know, David Cameron said he was going to create a compassionate Conservative party, as we discovered from being in coalition with him. He was under constant pressure from his right to stop listening to Liberal Democrats. And in the end, pressure to have a European referendum, which has caused more damage to this country than ever before. So it seems to me there is something of a moral duty for the Liberal Democrats over the course of the 10-year horizon to find a way to hold a space that actually crushes the Conservative Party into the far right, which their worst instincts are pulling them towards. And that requires some discomfort, because every coalition, every party has to tolerate discomfort, for a party that is mobilised and driven in large parts by people who identify as progressive. But actually that centrist position, the pro-business position, maybe even not always pro every piece of government spending that the Labour Party wants to propose, maybe even pro-building in a way that sort of does honour to the liberal heritage. Maybe that might be a way to hold a piece of ground and actually replace the Conservative Party as a party of potential government. Now, maybe not, right? Like it's for the Liberal Democrats to choose their path. It's perfectly honourable to be a third party. I remember hearing though Tim Farron say once, I'm tired of being right and coming third. If you want to change the country, why do you want to do it from third position? That's not a winning position. So what's the strategy over 10 years to go from 72 to 172 to 372? Because it requires the extension of your voting coalition beyond your comfort zone. Yeah. And it seems to me that the central challenge that can be made, that is as comfortable as possible for Liberal Democrats, and yet an essential challenge for this Labour Party that's not particularly constructive, is Europe, right? I mean, this country is self-harming because we are so frightened of a positive relationship with Europe, too frightened to talk about a European mobility scheme. There's a campaign out in the exhibition hall in favour of visas for creatives, something my university really cares about. What God's name are we doing being timid about Europe when this is a piece of economic and social sabotage that the country is pursuing? And the Labour Party is too frightened to stand up for it. It's not constructive. My view is that Liberal Democrats should be making life incredibly difficult for Labour on Europe. At the moment, almost nobody is making it hard for them to turn their face away from Europe. And if the strategic goal, I'm interested to know what people in this room think, if the strategic goal is to stop being third, there is never going to be enough space on the left. Never. So which is the 30 to 40% of the voters that the Liberal Democrats want to target over time, And my hypothesis is that they exist in the centre ground. They require the Liberal Democrats to close out the Conservatives and push the Conservatives to the right, and that means dominating a pro-business agenda and start with Europe.
Continue to steal Mark's mic. Thank you. Really fascinating contributions, and I think really interesting. I think all of those contributions really help to illustrate the different layers of the decisions and the challenges facing the Liberal Democrats at the moment. So, there's the sort of the day-to-day work of Parliament and making sure that issues are raised through that kind of legislative parliamentary route. There's the really important local government piece where Liberal Democrats are delivering, without housing or care or anything else. And then there are these much longer-term kind of strategic political questions. And I suppose, for a party to chart this course of constructive opposition to have impact, there's a big question about over what timeline and through what mechanism that impact has had, isn't there? Okay, I can already see a few hands. I think what we'll do is we'll take questions in groups of 3, and then I will come back to the panel to offer reflections. So first of all, here on the aisle.
Yeah, just for Polly, you asked us if we hate the Conservatives and we hate Nigel Farage. You didn't ask us if we hate the Labour Party. And I am living in something of a desert for liberalism. I'm living in a Labour-facing seat, surrounded by Labour-facing seats. So I tend to look upon the Labour Party very similarly to how I look upon the Conservative Party. I don't disagree that the left-right axis exists. I just don't think it's the axis that matters to most Liberal Democrats. We're more in favour of the liberal authoritarian axis on the political compass. And I think that needs to factor into strategic decision making.
Thank you. There's another question just there.
Hi, thank you. Polly, I thought what you said was absolutely bang on. I just want to add, or ask, sorry, the whole panel. Obviously, Europe should become an issue where we can put pressure on Labour. How do we do that without ramping up or seeing rhetoric from Telegraph, The Express, where they're going to start attacking Labour when they start bringing in these reforms and saying, oh, they're going about taking us back into the EU? Because we want to do that. It's a long-term goal, but how do we do that and also make sure that it's malleable and acceptable to voters? Because we want to do that in the long term.
And then was there a third question down here at the front?
Yeah, I think one of the things I've been struck by in the very short time we've had in this Parliament is that while the Conservatives did so much through their absolutely appalling personal behaviour and tolerance of appalling personal behaviour in office to destroy public trust and damage public trust in politics, we've seen behaviour from Labour that, while not approaching the level of egregiousness of the Conservative behaviour, is also not going to help with that. For example, the fact that they haven't withdrawn the whip from Jazz Athwell after he was revealed to be a slumlord, the fact that, they seem to be getting loads of free clothes from everyone. I don't know, the rest of us managed to pay for our clothes. Does the panel feel that this is something that we should be, pushing on, or does the risk of the longer term sort of damage to trust in the political system sort of outweigh the potential benefits to, the Liberal Democrats and potential electoral wars coming from that?
Great questions. So I'm going to come to our panel in turn, but I think a really interesting challenge about how the party at a national level relates to Labour when people's experiences of Labour will be very different in different parts of the country. A very easy question on how do you do constructive opposition on Europe? I'll be interested to hear the answers on that one. And then this point about trust in politics and ethics and standards, which I think is really important and obviously is something that is a sort of cross-party concern. Layla, can I come to you first?
Sure. Virginia, on the Labour-facing seats, whilst Dr. Westhaven on paper is a Tory-facing seat, and long may it continue, I have the city centre, which is overwhelmingly Labour-facing. And when it comes to local elections, absolutely, I hate them too. I hate a party, not individuals, but I mean the way they conduct themselves, the tribalism, they are very, very dogmatic in the way they approach things, and actually incompetent when it came to the coalition that we ran with them at the county council level, and that just collapsed. Not the coalition. Well, the coalition collapsed. We are still in power, but Labour pulled out because of their inability to take any responsibility for SEND, which is what they were responsible at county council level. So believe me, we've got beef. We've got beef with everyone. That's why we're in politics, is that we think we can do it better. I would argue we do it better, and when given the opportunities, time and time again, when we go into local government, when we're given positions where we're able to exercise any kind of influence or indeed executive power, which is the dream, and on that I would absolutely agree with Mulley, that is the dream, but we do it in a way that actually makes people's lives better. And I'm not always sure, especially given the first clause in their constitution, that Labour do it for that reason always. On Europe, we have a plan. It's very easily set out in our manifesto. Yes, the end is to seek a membership with the European Union. We don't say rejoin because we don't know what it's going to look like at that point. I don't agree with that framing. It's going to be some time away, and so the way we frame it recognises the realities where we are now. And I think the questioner's point around convincing the electorate is absolutely the right point. If we wanted to write policy that convinced Liberal Democrats, well, we did that. It was bollocks to Brexit, stop Brexit, putting it on t-shirts. It was a great way to convince lots of Lib Dems to vote Lib Dem. But if we actually want to change the country's view, given the deeply traumatic conversation that we've had over Europe over the last 10 years, and there is an emotional aspect to this. This is not just about GDP to the economy and things that are rational. It is an emotional argument that we need to make. If there was one thing we got horrifically wrong in that referendum, it was that it was not accepting and understanding that early enough. Then we need to win the electorate over. And this is where I think, we had a motion on the youth mobility scheme yesterday. We are talking about Erasmus+. There are some easy wins. We also have some things we need to avoid. So the visa waiver coming to an end next year, where everyone's going to have to face extremely long queues and a lot of bureaucracy to go on their holidays to France and Spain in a way that they didn't before. That's only going to be weaponised by Farage in particular. You can just predict it, it's coming. So there's quite a lot of work that we need to do, and it's the Labour government that's going to have to do that negotiation step by step with Europe. So we are going to be holding Labour's feet to the fire, but it's not going to be at the end of the process. We're not going to be doing that over seeking membership of the single market yet. We have to start where we are now with easy wins. The other thing that's also unhelpful is my understanding is they brought a lot of this negotiation into the Cabinet Office, and it sits with ministers who aren't sitting round the Cabinet table as full Cabinet members. So we are going to have to find ways that are perhaps less public in doing this, and there is a challenge in that. And then finally, conduct in politics. I think everyone is just, I see where you're coming from, Laura, and actually the level of sort of nepotism that we've seen also in positions in the Labour Party. I had no idea the sheer number of people who were married to each other, or sons and daughters of, or had played with as children with, and who are now ministers, having just been elected 2 seconds ago. It's just not how we do things, and it feels sort of wrong. But I would say right now there is a general sense, not just among parliamentarians, but I think in the country, that we've just got to give them a bit of space. And there's the modernisation committee, which I'm very interested in the work of. I think that a lot of good could come from that. We've got to give them a little bit of space on this stuff. So I understand your uncomfortableness, but I'm not sure going after them immediately is the right approach just yet.
Yeah, I guess first maybe partly picking up on that last point, I think where there is abuse of the rules, we absolutely should be critical and we should call for reform, but we should also be very careful not to fall into a sort of default populist anti-politician mindset. And I say that because one of the sort of memes, I guess, bit of misinformation that quite often circulates on social media is about how all these MPs have this really generous heating allowance that they all get and so on. And the facts behind it are complete nonsense. But you see far too many people sharing that amongst the Democrat circles. So, we shouldn't just think about, not falling into populist nonsense. That's some nice, comfortable words that's really about having a go at somebody else. We need to hold ourselves to those standards, absolutely. But on the left-right thing, I guess there are two problems I have with this, as it were, wanting to ask this question about should we say criticise Labour from left or right and so on. One is partly that we just don't know where the Labour government is going to end up. how timidly cautious or surprisingly radical is the October 30th budget going to be? You know, everything that we've seen so far could be preparing the field for a really minimalist budget that's a massive damp squib, or could be all this building up of all of this bad news to justify doing something directly. So we just, in a way, we can't, you know, when you don't know where the reference point is going to be, you can't really say where you want to be relative to the reference point. And let me give you a super mundane, uber Lib Dem example of this, of a broken street light near me that has been broken since the year before last. So it's a lovely, literal and metaphorical example of broken Britain. But if you ask why has it been broken for 2 years, Labour-run council, so you know, fits your point, Jenny, and your point, Laura, very nicely. So there's a bit of politics about badly run council that hasn't got to grips with basic to public services. But on the other hand, part of the story behind the broken street light is that UK power networks who provide the cabling have decided to stop providing cabling and power supplies to those sorts of traffic islands. Who are UK power networks? Well, they're a company, they're owned by a company based in Hong Kong who provide a basic bit of public infrastructure. So maybe actually, rather than this being an anti-Labour point, this street light, this is actually maybe really an anti-Tory point, and about, or maybe with tinges of reform perhaps, given it's, you know, given it's a Hong Kong-based company. But then on the other hand, another of the bits of the story about the broken street light, and yeah, the council chief exec loves all the emails he gets from me on this. Another bit of the story is about Brexit and the disruptions to the supply chain, and how actually getting replacement parts for replacement bulbs, replacement fuses, has been made much harder. And in fact, there was a nationwide shortage of streetlight fuses, as I understand it, a few months ago because of those supply chain bottlenecks. So maybe it's actually not really left or right, but it's European versus reformative. But then, of course, another of the complications is the council just seems to keep on losing track of the fact that the streetlight is still broken and they need to do something about it. And so I really don't, I don't know where on the political spectrum you should place my passion about. It is just mad that they cannot get that streetlight fixed. And also, my fear, genuine fear, that if you email the chief exec and they pass it on to someone else and then they give you a reply where the details are wrong and nothing really happens, okay, with a streetlight that's annoying. I mean, just let's keep our fingers crossed that that sort of management style doesn't have a genuinely horrific outcome in an area to do with, say, children's services. And you know, with Haringey, with all of the previous baby pizza scandals and so on, that's a and maybe it is just they're a bit incompetent at this stuff and they've got a brilliant manager in children's services. That may be the case, but as a symbol of what's wrong with Britain, that you could do a beautiful IPPR pamphlet about that one street light. But I just don't know where to place that on the political spectrum. What I do know is that's the sort of thing we should actually be absolutely passionate about getting stuck into our local campaigning to fix, whether that's left, right, whatever.
Brilliant, thank you. Polly, I was interested for you to also respond to what Layla was saying about influencing and shaping public opinion. So it sort of speaks to your point about what is the future voter coalition, but I guess the implication of some of Layla's comments is that coalition is, it's not fixed. The Lib Dems can affect where that coalition might sit in the future as well.
So a few thoughts. The first is, and I started working for Lib Dems when I was 22, and this is the party that enabled me to fall in love with politics and make a career. So always I will be grateful to the Lib Dems, but let's not delude ourselves about how perfect we are. Like, come on, guys. Chris Huhne, David Laws had to resign after 3 weeks because of a scandal. Nick Clegg got free suits. He remembered to declare them. That was quite nice. But and I could just go on listing things that we also have shame about. Let us not pretend that, there's this great thing called a Liberal Democrat, and they are the only competent public administrators and the only person who've ever had a bone of integrity in public life. That's not true, right? And when you allow yourself to think that you are just sort of morally and intellectually superior, that is when you start covering up the shameful things instead of recognising that you too sometimes get seduced into whatever it is, hiring your spouse as your employee or whatever it might be. And don't tell me there's no nepotism in our council groups. Sorry. Anyway, back to the point. Who does hate the Labour Party? Because you're right, I didn't ask. Anyone? There's a few. I knew David was going to first. I think, when I actually started working for the Dems in 2004, there were a lot of people who hated the Labour Party. Sarah Tether actually hated the Labour Party because of Brent, and you know, and Layla's right to be specific that in the vast majority of cases we're hating parties and the way institutions kind of start to distort people's behaviour, not in the vast majority of cases the individuals who are, you know, because hate for individuals is usually just a really stupid thing to waste your time on. But I don't think it's as simple as, oh, well, we need to figure out where the Labour Party is going. You do need to take a stand. Is the party of the view that, beyond just, because of course you would, as a member of the country, like the government to be competent, does the Liberal Democrat Party wish Keir Starmer well more than it wished David Cameron well or Rishi Sunak well? I wanted Rishi Sunak to help, you know, patch things up after Liz Truss. So there's nothing wrong with that, but what is the stance, right? On which is the territory that might motivate us to think that actually this is not a party that deserves to become the natural party of government. There is a wide enough coalition of voters and political beliefs that Liberal Democrats want to claim. And yeah, we might need to fight for some of them against some opposition. Other people might want those voter groups. But at the moment, I think that you can't just wait and see where the Labour Party is going to land. You have to think strategically about the long-term future of the Liberal Democrats and whether they want to be a party of government. On Europe specifically, Layla, of course, completely right. You can't just sort of make campaign literature that makes the people who are already persuaded fall in line. But look at the polls, look at the fundamentals. Actually, people are changing their minds on Europe. It's becoming a niche position. And sometimes, yes, you move slightly ahead of the tide, right? Because every single year, people turn 18. Of course, the voting age should be at birth, but that's a whole separate thing. And other people come to the end of their lives. And because of the tilt is such, it just means that the fundamentals about people's political perspectives are changing. And there is an opportunity there if the Liberal Democrats were willing to seize it. What was the question you actually wanted me to ask?
I'll come back to you. Labour's going to go in a few minutes, and I'm keen to get one more round in. Oh, goodness me, suddenly a flurry of hands. Okay, right here, because you're right by the microphone, and that makes things easier.
Okay, sorry. I just wondered, as a party, how flexible and fluid we are to adjust to the tide before elections, because I feel that what the Tories were very good at doing before every election was thinking, right, what does everybody want? I mean, I know they were going down the populist route and saying, right, we probably don't want to compromise us to that extent, but have we as a party got the ability to be flexible and to see what and to brand and target just before election?
I'll go over here. So for purposes of speed, I'm just going to do a round at the front and then I'll come back on the next round.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of linked to that. Sarah from Cambridgeshire. I was really interested in following your opening remarks, and I think there's kind of two ways to look at this, right? Either you go the strategic view of how do we get a coalition big enough to have power in the current electoral system that we have, or you say, here are our values, here's what we think is the right way to run a country. We want, PR and a multi-party system. Therefore, we're going to put forward our values, and that's the bottom line. I'm not arguing for that because I can see how that doesn't lead to a lot of power in the short term, and clearly we have to work with first past the post. But I was concerned by Mark's opening remarks to an extent about this was our mandate, sewage, cost of living, NHS, which was based on focus group and polling around a certain group of voters in a certain group of seats. Therefore, we have to just talk about that because that's the mandate. Where do we bring in our values so that the public actually know what a Liberal is? Because I think at the moment, if you ask most people, they have no idea what a Lib Dem stands for.
Just immediately behind you, and then I'll come to the final response from Layla.
Thank you so much. So I'm here in a professional capacity, so I go to all the conferences, and I find it not just in Lib Dem, but all of them, but the tribalism can be quite depressing. And I do take issue with the amount of this discussion that's just about who we hate the most. Why is the first question you ask, do we hate Labour, do we hate? So hate is an extremely strong word for one thing anyway, that I'm not sure we should be tapping so easily. But shouldn't we start from the premise of what do we believe in, what are the things that really matter to us, and then once we've worked those things out, how do we make that case to people? Rather than this sort of obsession with chasing the public around and trying to play five-dimensional chess with if there's a gap over here, we should move here, or go to the left, or go to the right. It's almost like a back to basics thing. Let's just stick to what we think the principles are, work out what they are, and then build a positive case. And I think so much of a kind of a really interesting panel discussion with really influential people with Lib Dem being about who we hate the most, I find quite unpleasant.
I'm sorry, I stopped.
I'll start with the last bit first. I totally agree. And actually, I tend to not hate anybody. I was never that kid at school. I was a member of every group. And in part, I think that's why I'm a Lib Dem. Genuinely, and I hope you also find that our conference is generally a lovely place with lots of lovely people who just want to make the world a better place. And I would also argue actively that bar almost none, I can imagine some, but all the parliamentarians I know go into politics for good reasons too. And the media vilifies them. We do a very good job of doing that, especially during elections, but actually the vast majority of people are doing it for the right reasons, and I don't think that's said enough in general, especially by people from different parties of each other. How flexible and fluid are we to brand and target for elections? We're getting much better at targeting. I mean, I think in terms of the delivery, the tactical delivery of our campaign this time, our campaigns team absolutely nailed it. And I think a big public thank you needs to be said to them over and over and over again. And if anyone sees Dave McCobb or any of this team, buy them lots of drinks, they bloody deserve it. It's not really much of a lifting of the veil to say we poll a lot and did polling a lot over the course of the last Parliament. What became really clear really quickly, particularly over the last couple of years, was that those top issues, the NHS, sewage, etc., that you saw as campaigning, cost of living sort of emerged a bit later, particularly after Agent Truss got hold of the Treasury. But they were all really important things to people. And so that is what, it's about them. You start where they are. I mean, I was a teacher before. You start with where they are. You don't start where you are and then expect them to catch up. So I think that's right. But to Sarah's point, PR and electoral reform, and in particular framing it as reforming our politics, was one of the top 5 things that was on the front page of the manifesto. So I'm not sure I agree with your characterization that it's kind of you have to pick one or you pick the other. However, it is also true to say unless we get power, we're never going to get PR. Because there is no incentive for the Conservatives or the Labour Party to deliver it. In fact, I've had very depressing conversations with people now very high up in the Labour Party actively arguing against PR because the bar is lower for them to get over the top with first past the post. And actually, look what's happened. They were elected on late 30s percentage of the vote, and they've got an enormous majority in Parliament. The issue for us is that actually we think that's corrosive to democracy as a whole, because you end up not having a government that reflects the views of the people more widely in society. And whilst I, don't love that reform are there and that there are more Greens and whatever, but if we want a system that has PR, which suggests also there'll likely be a fragmentation of political parties at that point, because you can get more seats on fewer numbers of votes, actually, I'd rather out than in. I'd rather that people felt that there was a voice that they had in Parliament, and then that led to people working together, let's come back to the word constructive, and that they were working together in the national interest, and that is a good thing for our democracy, and is it part of the reason why we advocate for PR? It's not just that we get more seats, let's say, we've gamed the system now, we don't even need to have that levelled at us, but it's because it delivers a better, more consensus-based politics that acts in the national interest. So I don't think it's an either or.
Can I just use my position as chair for 1 minute and just ask you about social care,
Yes,
which
please.
is something that I was sort of expecting to come up, and I'd just be interested in, it's an area where the Lib Dems have been very clear they'd like to see the government go further. Just wonder whether you might want to spend 1 minute on that as a possible example of this constructive opposition.
With pleasure. I mean, I thought it was really interesting that during the election, there are certain things where we kind of know, not exactly, but what needs to happen with social care. And bluntly, what it comes down to is more money does need to be spent on it. There's then a question about, do you do a cap? Do you do free personal care? Do you do some combination of the two? I'm lucky to have Andrew Dilnott as a constituent who's giving me tutorials on this, so this is very helpful to me. But we kind of know where we need to go, and I was looking back over Health and Social Care Committee reports over this, and every 5 years they do another one that starts. We know what needs to happen, we just need the political will. And so whenever we're talking about cross-party working, you think that that's some sort of magic bullet, but actually often it ends up pushing things into the longer grass. And so what I'd like to see is the government grab this particular nettle and actually do something with it, but do it in a way that gets a level of buy-in from different parts of the political spectrum first, so we don't end up with what we saw with Theresa May, where during an election she brings it up with not talking to anyone before, and you end up having a massive political backlash that actually puts back the cause by 5 years. And I think we're still living through some of that fear from the governing party. So I think this is where potentially the Select Committee and others are useful. The question I'm keen to start answering, and I should just caveat this by saying until we constitute, and I do want to run a consensus-based committee, but I hope they can see the value in doing this. What is the cost of not doing social care? Because it's always framed, particularly in the Treasury, understandably, of, well, we need more money into the system, we don't have money, therefore we do nothing. And that seems to be the big step back that we've seen from the Labour government so far. You know, the thread through everything is there is no money, therefore we cannot. However, I would love, particularly on this issue, we know how it clogs up the NHS, in particularly that 5-year window, the Treasury loves the 5-year window. In that 5-year window, what is the cost to wider society, not just the NHS, but also local government, but also other parts of society, of not sorting out social care? And I wonder if that's a thread that we've not pulled before, and I'm quite keen to explore if it's something that us and the academics can start to do.
Thank you. Thank you very much for making the time, and
good luck trying to get out as well.
Sorry guys. There were lots of questions at the back which we didn't come to you last time. I don't know whether, Mulley, could you sort of fight your way further to the back of the room, or try and take another round of questions from the back? Gentleman over there by the wall, pass the microphone over.
Thank you. I'm from Brentwood in Essex, so I stood as BBC. I've done it for about 5 times. We're a constituency where reform ended up coming second. And one of the reasons for that was there's an awful lot of misunderstanding, misinformation and ignorance on issues such as immigration. And I'd love us to use our constructive opposition to actually drill down on these issues and put out the truth about immigration. And I remember Tim Farron did this, I think, on Question Time. It was fantastic. Remind me, those who are old in the room will remember David Penhaligon. Yeah. Very good at taking complex issues, but breaking them down into simple, easy to understand language. And I think we need to do that on issues like that and explain it as it is. That's the first point. Second point, I think it's good with Polly because she is raising some few issues. I think it makes people feel a bit uncomfortable, and I think we need to be, because there is a lot of celebration about 72 seats, but as Tim Farron said this morning, get over that, celebrate it, got 72, what do we do now? And strategically, we've got to navigate a path forward of where we go next. And it really does need these people like Layla doing the day job and the current stuff, but we need some strategic thinkers. Where do we move the party forward? Have we hit the ceiling? How can we go up to the next level? And how do we reach out to those people who aren't touched by us this time round? Okay, thank you.
There was another question at the back on the other side. Sorry, we have to. And then, thank you. And then one here by the door, and that'll be it for this round.
Thanks very much. I'm Brian from Milton Keynes area. Just a couple of points I'd like to make. The first one, Mark said...
With this, maybe our last round, so can we keep the questions as brief as we can, please?
Okay, well, I'll just say very quickly. Mark said that we have to play the system to get electoral success. Parliament's a system, you have to play that as well. I was pleased to see Wendy Chamberlain taking that forward. May I suggest that one of the things that she says is that any Lib Dem spokesperson on any topic be given the right to talk from the dispatch box directly opposite their Labour number. And secondly, just in relation to Polly, people ask me why I'm a Liberal. I give them 2 examples. I say, do you support the Russian invasion of Ukraine? And they'll say no. And I'll say, why not? And they think about it. And I say, it's because Russia is trying to deny liberty to Ukrainians. And the other example I would give is this. Two people go into a supermarket. One is comfortably off, one is poor. You have on sale an item, buy one, get one half price. The person who's relatively well off would take up that bargain. The person who is not can't afford the half price. Liberty is about giving people that right, and all liberalism should be based upon that, in my view.
Thank you. And then there's another question just here.
Thank you very much. Hello, I'm Jane from Canterbury and Coastal. I wanted first of all to look at the term constructive opposition, and I know we're talking here about MPs and in Parliament, but in a way all members are part of this constructive opposition. What we say to people out there in the streets is really important, and I really agree with the idea of not attacking people, and the Lib Dem has basically come across as trustworthy. I do a lot of work, street stalls about Europe, and I just listen to a lot of reform people ranting, but in fact if you listen, and you then give them some facts and show that you're a trustworthy person, they will start to listen to you, and that will all come together and influence people in the street in a big way. So my question also is it possible for the National Party to start giving out some of this correct information on things like, for example, immigration? I'm running a discussion group with my local group on immigration where we can share all this information and learn to understand other people's attitudes, and it means that we can get together and maybe have a sort of national teach-in. I speak as a teacher here, if that would be possible. Thank you.
Great. I think really interesting point about where opposition sits. Can I just pose a sort of final question to the two of you from my position as chair, which is, what do you think success would look like on this kind of constructive opposition point for the end of this Parliament? What would success look like for the Liberal Democrats to know whether or not they had provided constructive opposition at the end of this Parliament? So maybe I'll come to you first, Polly, and then we'll finish with Mark.
Yes, because Mark is much more likely to give the correct answer.
Full pressure there, yeah.
This is I'm so glad to have been part of this conversation. And I think that you're right. You know, we should approach public administration, politics with love. And it's actually the reason I'm no longer a member of the party, no longer a member of any party, is actually in the end, I came to a view that it seems Mark, oddly enough, shares, which is that actually it's competent public administration, cross-party working that matters. I'm actually in favour of PR and all sorts of other weird things, but I'm most in favour of consensus building through things like deliberative and participative democracy. I question the role of political parties actually in the way they reinforce and develop tribalism between people. There's lots of really interesting evidence about how once you've adopted a partisan position, you then respond to political claims with the emotional rather than the rational parts of your brain, right? So it's just like joining a football team. It distorts your perception of the world. And I worry a bit that there's a comfort zone within this room and I think elsewhere that is somehow saying that Liberal Democrats have a unique claim to competent public administration because they're a bit less tribal and they're not extremists and radicals. I mean, that's not a reason to join a political party, that's a reason to join the civil service. And it's okay, right? Like, you don't have to be a member of the Lib Dems. But if you want to be a member of a political party, that has to be because of something that is, yes, values-based, but also democratically based. I think we sometimes go round and round in circles on this idea of, asking a focus group, doing some poll, and then the sort of heartless Dave McCobb is like, no, we must do these things, and people worry that it's populist, but they sort of suck it up. Democracy is about people getting a choice of their government, right? Like, it's literally about people getting a choice and being listened to. There is no shame in making sure that people are aligned with the government, unless you're not a Democrat, because you believe in you being right. And that's called autocracy. So I have lots of beliefs and values, but the most strong is that I'm a pluralist, and I believe that the solution to most of our problems is not what I think, but what we can agree on. So I would reform the whole of politics, but unfortunately, as Mark says, you can't do that unless you can get into a position of power in order to change it. I don't know what success looks like, but I think it should start with deciding whether the pathway is upwards or the pathway is just the biggest third party in a first past the post system in the world, and some councils that are moderate and highly qualified at public administration. That seems like not a reason to have a political party. And the example of Ukraine is fascinating. You find me a mainstream politician who doesn't agree on Ukraine. I once had an argument with a boyfriend about that, actually, because I was a Liberal Democrat and he was in the Labour Party, and I kept coming up with reasons I was in the Liberal Democrats before I gave up on partisanship. And he kept pointing out that those were the reasons he was in the Labour Party. Right, like, let's not delude ourselves about what partisanship does to the brain. I had another thought, but I didn't write it down, so I can't remember. So it is a parable. So you'll remember. So there was a guy who worked in the Lib Dems when I was there called Jonathan, who was also a councillor in Sunderland.
Oh yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
great guy. I was working as a local government advisor. He took me up to meet the Labour leader it was Sunderland, right?
Well, somewhere in the northeast, certainly. Gateshead.
Gateshead.
Yeah.
See,
This is why I
don't do frontline politics, right? Anyway, Gateshead. And it was so fascinating, right? I met the leader of the Labour Council. Jonathan got me in to see the leader of the Labour Council. And he talked about how he had very ruthlessly co-opted the Liberal Democrats to be the soggiest, most toothless opposition. He involved them in every single decision. You know, don't be naive, right? I was hopelessly naive in 2010 about, like, the Conservatives. Every waking thought was about how to obliterate the Liberal Democrats, really. They will be nice to you on the surface and in the tea rooms. But, like, if you want to be an opposition, don't be constructive, play dirty. I wish our politics wasn't like that, but that's the way it works. Don't be like Jonathan.
Passionate plea against constructive opposition. I like it as a final.
I'll try to be slightly nicer to your question with my concluding comments then. I guess two things. So firstly, I think it is fundamentally liberal to say that people know for themselves what is most important and best for their lives. That is a very different, actually, ideological tenet than the one that Labour Party come at things from. And so, I think using, say, opinion polls and focus groups is a way of trying to be more accurate, more scientific even, in understanding what the answer to that question is as to what matters most to people's lives. And so I think it is fundamentally a good thing when politicians pay attention to opinion polls and focus groups, because what they're doing is they're paying attention to what the public thinks, not the views of their mates from school, not the views of the billionaire who has bought a media outlet. They're listening to the public. And in that sense, opinion polls and focus groups are, as it were, the political equivalent of the jury. There is something fundamentally good about the idea that you randomly pick 12 people to stick them in a jury to make a decision on a difficult case that will, determine the future course of somebody's life. And the broader political equivalent of that is taking 1,000 people at sort of random and finding out from them. They're absolutely focus groups, canvassing, lots of other bits, but that is a really important principle. They know best what matters to them. Now, when they tell us that, we absolutely then have to say, okay, well, what's our Liberal solution to that? Our Liberal Democrat solution to that? And that's what we present to them. But they know best what matters to them, and that is a really important starting point. On the question about what success looks like in terms of trying to answer your question, well, one version of success is to dish the question, but I guess the other version is, because we're not a think tank, we're not a pressure group, we're not a trade union, all valuable organisations in their own way, we are a political party. Success is 10:01 p.m, polling day, next general election. Let's hope the exit poll continues its run of being pretty accurate. What are the numbers that come up then? That's the thing that we, and only we as a political party, can do, that think tanks, pressure groups, all of those other organisations have many very valuable contributions to make. But fundamentally, why be a political party? Why put candidates up for it? It would be so much easier if we never fought an election? Think of all of the burden and stress and money and exhaustion, everything you would put yourself through. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we were an organisation where none of that was part? It would be, I'm sure everyone at the IPPR works extremely hard. Wouldn't it be blissfully easy, Brighton? The reason we put ourselves through all of that is because part of what makes us, part of what we hope will make, make the country's future better, part of what makes us a functioning democracy is that electoral part of it. And that's what makes a political party different, distinct. And so there are things that pressure groups are much better at, campaigning for that long-term change, regardless of how unpopular a viewpoint might be in the short term, trying to bring about long-term change. There's really vital roles. I really hope that people like the European movement, for example, particularly step up their activities over the next few years in that respect. But for a political party, what does success look like? It's how many people have won power in the election to make more of a difference to people's lives.
Thank you, and thank you for an excellent and really interesting set of questions as well from the audience. I think that was a really fascinating discussion, and conference fringe parity notwithstanding, we at IPPR are delighted to continue working with Liberal Democrat politicians at both national and local and regional level as well, and we were delighted to see a number of IPPR recommendations in the Lib Dem manifesto before the election. So it's been brilliant to hear from our panel today and from all of you as well. Thank you, especially those who sat on the floor or stood throughout. I know it's not very comfortable, but hopefully the quality of the discussion made it worthwhile, and I hope you can still feel your legs. So please do join me in thanking our panel.